the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Isidra Mencos. Isidra, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. So I am originally from Barcelona, Spain, but I came to the US in 1992 to study for a PhD at University of California in Berkeley. I've had a very varied career, always around words and stories in publishing, in editing, in writing coach, etc. And in 2016, I finally committed to my lifelong dream of being a writer. I had published things before on and off, but just kind of doubled in writing. In 2016, I decided to quit my very plush corporate job to embrace my dream. And I started writing in English at that point. And since then, I've been lucky enough to publish in a lot of literary magazines like Chicago Quarterly Review, from Porch Journal, the Penmen Review, and so on and so forth, many more. And also in general interest magazines like Wired, Wisdom Well, etc. And one of my stories was actually listed as notable in the Best American Essays Anthology. And just a couple of days ago, my first debut memoir came out. The name is Promenade of Desire, a Barcelona Memoir. And it's a very raw and sexual coming-of-age story where I explain my evolution from Catholic virgin maiden to seductive Mata Hari as Spain evolved from dictatorship to democracy.
What a complex plot. That's incredible. Okay, I'm going to start off with the fact that Barcelona is truly one of my favorite cities in the world. It is not only gorgeous, and the people are lovely, and the food in Spain is very good. And so I'm excited to be able to just flash back to the days I spent in Barcelona, which are not nearly as many that you would have had, but still the cobblestone streets and the wide thoroughfares and just right there, you're right there on the water. It's a fantastic city.
Yes, I absolutely adore Barcelona. I go there very often. My whole family is there. I have 9 siblings, so we are 10 in total, and everybody's there. So I do go often to see them and to see my nephews and nieces. My parents are now both deceased. And actually, I love so much Barcelona that is a real character in the memoir. There's a lot about the city streets, about how we lived in that era, the 70s, the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, which was a time where Barcelona didn't have as many tourists as it is today. It felt like it was ours. Now, when I go to Barcelona, it's so full of tourists. It feels a little bit foreign to me. But if you plan to go back to Barcelona, I advise that you don't go in the summer. You're going to find less tourists. And it's also very hot and humid in the summer. So it's kind of tough. Just try to go in the fall or even in the spring, beginning of the spring. It's going to be a little chillier, but you're going to enjoy it a lot more.
Sounds like it's a real, your word was raw experience, but that you really are able to tap into some challenging themes.
Absolutely, yes. I lived through such a unique period in the history of Spain because we went from a 40-year dictatorship to democracy when the dictator died in 1975. The democracy transition took a little while to finish up and so on, but the cultural and sexual revolution was immediate because we had grown up quite repressed. The dictatorship was very closely allied to the Catholic Church, especially in the beginning, the first 20 years or so. And, we were raised to believe that sex was only for marriage, within that for procreation, masturbation was a sin, and you would go to hell if you touch yourself, that type of thing, right? And it was even forbidden to have sexual displays in public, like a French kiss. They could take you to in jail for indecent behavior. So that was the atmosphere. Then when I was 17, first year of university, imagine I'm young, I'm finally out of the the Catholic school where I went my whole childhood and teenage years. Franco dies, the dictator dies. And then immediately it was like the hippie era came to Spain in 2 seconds, 10 years after it had peaked in the United States. And the youth started experimenting with drugs, with alcohol, with free love, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just a radical change. And I always felt like my story was the story of a whole generation, because this generation, the youth at that time, had grown one way, very repressed, and then all of a sudden, this huge amount of freedom. It was exhilarating, but at the same time, it was also confusing, because it's so new. Everything is so new. And a lot of people kind of went to the other extreme. So there was, for example, a huge epidemic of AIDS because of heroin use, a lot of robberies to feed that addiction, et cetera, et cetera. So in my case, I didn't go that far, but I definitely experimented a lot with promiscuity, alcohol, things like that. And I think a lot of that was less pleasurable than just trying to find intimacy and trying to learn what it means to be lustful without shame, to be loved, and trying to really recover all the parts of me that had been repressed since childhood. And a big path to that was salsa dancing. I fell in love with salsa dancing. And at the time in Barcelona, there was only one club of salsa in the mid-70s, and it was in the red light district. And very appropriately, it was called Taboo. Imagine that, right? So I was at Taboo 4 or 5 nights a week, dancing until 5 a.m. And that was a path for me to recover that sensuality that had been kind of beaten up out of me as a child, with a lot of sexual restrictions and repression.
Well, take me on a journey from Spain to the United States. Did you experience a lot of culture shock?
Oh, huge cultural shock. I mean, in fact, I came here in 1992 to study for a PhD, as I mentioned before. And 2 months later, I had an ulcer. I just couldn't understand this culture. It was just so busy. Everybody was so busy. I didn't know anybody. I knew one person that I had met in Barcelona who lived in Berkeley. So that was great. But I was shocked because I would say, okay, can we meet? And she's like, let me look. And she would look at her agenda and she's like, in 2 weeks, I have time from 2 to 4. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Because in Spain, it's like you would pick up the phone and say, I'm coming by. And you would just come right away to visit a friend and have a coffee. And you would go out every night with your friends. And it was just so social. And here people were busy all the time. They were stressed out. They were working so hard. Nobody had time for anything or for anybody else. It was just a huge shock. Even the university, I was used in Spain to, the university was these huge classes with 200 students, no discussion of any kind. It was just the professor giving a lecture. It was kind of boring. Then I came here to a PhD program and there were like 8 to 12 students per class, and the whole class was discussion, and the professors wanted to hear your voice and wanted to challenge them. That was new to me. Because in Spain, you were raised to respect authority and never challenge authority, right? So that was amazing. It was just such a awakening for me to realize that I could actually speak up and have contrary opinions, and it would be respected. So overall, even though it was hard for me to adapt at the beginning, I ended up loving it because the capacity for change, the flexibility for turning yourself around and reinventing yourself if you want with new careers, the encouragement to be yourself and to open up and raise your voice was amazing. So I think I really came into myself here in the United States.
Well, you chose to write your memoir in English. You've been in the United States now for quite a while. Was that a simple thing to do? Like you were always writing in English, or is it that you switch back and forth between languages?
It's funny because I never wrote in English before except for work. Even my PhD was in Spanish because it was about Spanish literature. But I consider myself bilingual. I've been here for 30 years. all my work life has been done a lot of it in English. But I was always writing in Spanish. But what happened is at 2015, I started taking courses in Stanford, online courses about writing memoir and other courses in other places. And I had to present my work in English. So when I started working on this memoir, I started writing in English, and I discovered that I loved it because it was challenging, because it forced me to go on a treasure hunt all the time for the right word. Like I would know that I wanted to say brave, but I didn't want brave. I wanted a different word, and I knew what it was, but I couldn't bring it to my mind readily. So I would go to the thesaurus, and look at the synonyms. And when I saw it, I recognized it. Oh, that's what I wanted. And then I could use it. It was just so fun. And then the other thing that happened is, even though it was challenging, it gave me a different voice. Spanish is a lot longer than English. It's like an English sentence is going to be about 20 to 25% longer in Spanish. English is a lot more economical. And also the style here, when people teach you how to write, etc., is about being economical and not overusing adverbs and adjectives and things like that. So it gave me a bit of a different voice that allowed me to be a lot more direct, which I liked. And the other thing that happened was that most of my siblings don't read English. They don't understand English. So I felt a little safer because it was a very raw book. And there's a lot of a very gutsy examination of family ties and family conflicts. And it made me feel a little safer, like, okay, well, I'm writing in English. They won't read it. Of course, that's not true, because now I want to publish in Spanish as well. And I'm going to work on that. But for the moment that I was writing, it made me feel a little bit more free.
I find that really an interesting comment. I feel, as an English speaker who is not bilingual, that the Spanish language is so much more poetic than what English is. And so were you able to blend that poetry of the Spanish language with English?
I was. I think my style is quite descriptive and lyrical. And in fact, I went to a workshop once with a teacher, a wonderful teacher. I'm not going to name names, but I enjoyed it immensely and I really liked it. She was very adamant about this thing of do not use adverbs, do not use adjectives, do not use this, do not use that. And I said to her, look, have you read Gabriel Garcia Marquez? I mean, it's all adjectives and adverbs, right? This is a different style in Spanish. You are a bit more descriptive. You are a bit more lyrical, even though I restrain it a little bit, my natural tendency in Spanish, that lyricism still persists because it's part of my makeup. That's my native frame of mind, my native emotional makeup.
And tell me about your writing process. So you started in 2015 with a class that you took, and then what was the journey till you completed it?
Well, I worked on this book for almost 6 years, on and off. And what happened is I didn't have a lot of time to write when I was in this corporate job. It was a very demanding executive position. I had a very long commute every day. So finally, in March of 2016, I quit. And I launched my own business. I work also as a bilingual developmental editor, writing coach, but I work part-time because then what I did is I started writing every morning. That's what I did. It was I established a schedule. I started writing every morning. I did, 13, 14, 15 drafts of this memoir. I have lost count. And one of the biggest things that I did when I had already finished it, I hired a developmental editor. And she advised me to go from chronological to asynchronous, to mix the two timelines, the time of the childhood with the time of my youth. And it was one of the most difficult restructurings that I've ever done, in one of the most difficult drafts. But I'm really glad I did it because it allowed me to play with thematic echoes from childhood into adulthood. And it worked. It really, really worked. But it caused me tears, I'm telling you. I mean, I had Post-its on the wall. I had flashcards. I was using Scrivener flashcards, moving them up and down. It was just so hard, but I did it. And then, once I started working with my publisher, I was still correcting things and editing things until basically a week before it went to the print. I mean, the great Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges said once that you publish because you want to stop editing. And it's so true. I think a writer never ends editing until the book is published and they cannot do it anymore. And then if there is a reprint, they're probably still going to change some things.
I was going to just say that. Absolutely. I'm sitting here on the other side of the microphone laughing because that's exactly what happens is you go back, you reread and you're like, oh no, I should have said of instead of for.
Yes.
It's horrible. Everything's all wrong now. I mean, like we writers over dramatize every little possible thing. And, the audience very rarely notices anything. So, I mean, there's those error hunters out there. We ought to give them some sort of title. Like they should get a badge on the bottom of their email signature, like I'm an error hunter. but most people just really like a good story. And it's all about taking your audience on a journey because even, fiction, nonfiction, all writing should be interesting. All writing should inform, all writing should educate and entertain. And, when it's super dry, you lose your audience because it's way too technical and maybe somebody likes it, but when it's really dry, when you don't have enough lyrics in it, when you don't have enough imagery in it, if it's just too straightforward, you just go from point A to point B without taking the audience on the journey. And that's what they really, really want is that journey. And, if you could climb the Barcelona hills in your memoir, and if you can take your audience on that journey over the cobblestones and past the cathedrals and into the old parts of town. I mean, some of that stuff that is just I'm telling you, gorgeous. People, if you have not been to Barcelona, put that on your bucket list because they have some of the most gorgeous places there. The cathedrals, the restaurants, the food, the people, everything is so much fun. I'm telling you.
I agree.
I always do a little hop on, hop off bus and just really see the whole thing. And then you just go back and you pick out the one or two things that you really want to do again. And anyway, I'm going to go on and on and on about it. But
but you love the book, Alison, because Barcelona is a huge presence in the book. And I actually even wrote a little personal guide of Barcelona that people who subscribe to my newsletter can get for free. And it's kind of fun because it's just very tied up also with things related to my family history and things like that. And it's kind of fun.
Isidra Mencos, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me in social media. I'm everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and it's at Isidra Mencos, and that's ISI, D as in Daniel, RA, and Mencos is M as in Mary, E-N as in Nancy, COS. So at Isidra Mencos, or they can find me on my website, isidramencos.com.
Very good. Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yes, let's go for it.
Do you like to journal?
I do, but I'm not super consistent with it. Sometimes I journal every day. Other times I don't journal for months. It's on and off.
If you had to pick any meal right now, what would you pick?
If I could, I would eat my mother's partridges that she cooked with my father's hunting pudding. How do you say, like the spoils that he got hunting? He was a hunter. And my mom made like the best rabbit in chocolate sauce, this best partridges in a sauce with almonds and cabbage. It's just any hunting dish that she made was delicious.
And what is next on your bucket list?
Well, right now I'm very focused on, promotions and presentations, conferences about the book and about the history of Spain. But I already have a collection of essays almost finished. It's called Mandala Way, and it's about the many selves and things we leave behind as we evolve. And next, I'm going to tackle a novel. I'm going to go back to fiction, which was my first love.
Well, Isidra, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you very much, Alison, for having me here. I love your podcast and I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo! We're all done. Originally from Spain, Isidra Mencos has lived in the U.S. since 1992. She holds a PhD in Spanish and Latin American contemporary literature from the University of California, Berkeley, where she taught Spanish language, literature, culture, and creative writing for 12 years. Since she started creative writing nonfiction in English in 2016, her essays have been published in literary journals, Diálogo, Kaga Quarterly Review, the Penmen Review, Newfound, Stirring Literature Journal, the Manifestation, and Porch Journal. One of her pieces was listed as notable in the Best American Essays Anthology. Her work has also appeared in widely read online publications like Wisdom Well, Wired, and Better After 50. Her debut memoir, Promenade of Desire, a Barcelona Memoir, came out October 11, 2022 from She Writes Press. For more information about Isidra, visit her website at isidramencos.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit floridawriters.org. Until next time.